"Excuse me, miss, this is the service entrance." The male, protocol-like voice of the security guard interrupted Natasha just as she was approaching the mansion's main gate. She gently tightened her grip on her purse strap, looked around, and finally gave a polite smile before following the direction to the side entrance. The morning sun hit the concrete and glass facade full on, reflecting the clear Napa Valley sky. The mansion was imposing, surrounded by vineyards, perfectly trimmed cypress trees, and an automated gate that looked more like the entrance to an art gallery. Natasha crossed the side garden in silence, her light steps at odds with the tension she felt in her chest. In the background, the soft sound of a piano echoed from inside the house. "Natasha Ivanova," called a woman with a tight bun and sharp eyes. "I'm Denise, the head housekeeper. Let's take the tour of the house. Bring your things, please." Natasha nodded slightly and followed the woman through the entrance to the staff wing. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the scent of polished wood and lavender mingled with the sound of hurried footsteps. Everything was clean, methodical, silent, as if the mansion breathed on its own. "This is the main kitchen. You'll coordinate with the chef twice a week. On the other days, each staff member handles their own meals. The guest rooms are down this hallway, and Mr. Lancaster's wing, our employer, is upstairs and completely off limits. Never go there unless you're called. Any questions?" "None," Natasha replied in perfectly polished English with a slight Russian accent. Denise continued the tour firmly. The house had a full automation system that controlled lighting, sound, curtains, and security via voice command. There were clear rules: absolute silence after 10 p.m. No personal cell phones in shared areas, and most importantly, never initiate conversation with the boss. "Mr. Lancaster values his privacy very much," Denise emphasized, adjusting her glasses. "He's not one for pleasantries. Stick to your role, and everything will go smoothly." The mansion was grand, even by Napa standards. Natasha kept a calm expression, but her eyes were alert to every detail. The Italian marble at the entrance, the precise curve of the oak staircase, the carefully placed modern art paintings. Nothing was out of place. Exactly the kind of man she knew she would find there. It wasn't until late afternoon that she saw him for the first time. The office door suddenly opened, and Brian Lancaster stepped out, holding a tablet in one hand and adjusting his tie with the other. He wore a dark grey suit, not a single wrinkle out of place. Natasha was in the hall, polishing the hardwood floor with a precisely folded cloth. When he saw her, he stopped for just a second, just 1 second. But it was enough for his gaze to lock onto hers. "Sorry, sir," she said, lowering her head slightly and stepping aside as protocol dictated. "It's fine," he replied in a restrained, almost deep voice, and looked away. As he walked off, Natasha noticed his fingers had trembled as he tucked the tablet into his jacket's inner pocket. A small detail. But she noticed those kinds of things. In the days that followed, the routine began to settle in. Natasha adapted naturally to every rule, every small gesture expected in that house full of rituals. She never forgot to change the fresh flower arrangements on Tuesdays or to space the couch cushions exactly 2 inches apart. Nothing escaped her radar. Brian, for his part, seemed to avoid her. Even without trying to be noticed, Natasha could feel the quick glances when he thought she wasn't looking, and she also noticed the prolonged silences every time she walked into a room he was in, whether to pick up a glass, adjust the curtains, or turn off the lights. A curious discomfort overtook him, as if the mere presence of the cleaning lady forced him to reorganize himself internally. Until on a Wednesday morning, the unexpected happened. While collecting coffee cups in the office, Natasha dropped a napkin. As she bent down to pick it up, the edge of the cloth brushed against Brian's ankle. He was distracted, looking at a spreadsheet on his laptop. "Oh, sorry," she said, quickly retrieving the napkin. "It's okay," he replied, though his face was already slightly flushed. They remained silent for a moment, Natasha with the napkin in hand, and Brian with his eyes fixed on the screen, not typing a single key. "I'm done here," she said in a neutral tone. "Great, thank you," he replied, only realizing afterward that he'd thanked her for something he never normally did. She left the office as if nothing had happened. He, on the other hand, spent the next few minutes staring at the computer screen without absorbing a single word. Later that same week, Brian's parents arrived at the property for the weekend. Eleanor and Richard Lancaster, a typical Boston couple, elegant, well-mannered, soft-spoken and classically poised, were greeted with discreet enthusiasm. "Brian, this house is as wonderful as ever," said Eleanor, kissing her son on the cheek. "And that garden, magnificent." "Credit goes to the maintenance team," he replied with a reserved smile. On Sunday, Eleanor suggested lunch in the backyard garden. A classic American Sunday lunch with roast beef, mashed potatoes with homemade gravy, cornbread and coleslaw. Natasha helped set the outdoor tables and was assigned to bring drinks and utensils. "You must be Natasha, right?" Eleanor asked as soon as she saw her. "The new team member? My, what a lovely girl." "Yes, ma'am, Natasha Ivanova." "Russian, right?" Charming accent. "Don't be so formal, dear. You can call me Eleanor. And this is Richard, my husband." "Pleasure to meet you," Natasha said with a slight smile. "She speaks better English than most Americans," Richard joked in a light tone. As Natasha cleared the glasses from the first round of drinks, Brian watched silently. For the first time, he saw his mother engage in such a long conversation with a member of the household staff. And the strangest thing, Natasha didn't seem forced or unsure. She remained calm, polite, but not submissive. It was as if she knew her place, and yet refused to be diminished by it. "So, Natasha, what did you do before working here?" Eleanor asked, with the typical curiosity of mothers who can sniff romance from afar. "I worked in finance, in Russia." "Finance? How interesting. And how did you end up here?" "Life changes our plans, ma'am. I came looking for a bit of silence." Eleanor smiled as if she understood more than she let on. Brian looked away and took a sip of wine. Lunch flowed with ease. The California sun warmed without being harsh, and the vineyards in the background looked like a movie set. For the first time in months, Brian found himself laughing at one of his father's jokes. And though he wouldn't admit it to himself, he noticed everything felt more comfortable with Natasha around. Later, while clearing the dishes, she thanked him discreetly. "Thank you for letting me take part." "No need to thank me. It was my mother's idea." "Still, it was nice." He didn't reply. He just looked at her, too long for an employer, too long not to be noticed. But she only smiled politely and returned to the kitchen. That night, Brian came down the stairs in silence, opened a bottle of red wine and poured just one glass. Then he looked toward the door to the service wing, where he knew she was already asleep. He sighed, sat on the couch and picked up the remote. But he didn't turn on the TV. She was just the cleaning lady. But somehow, she had unsettled his entire world. "This needs to be aligned immediately. No excuses. I want the projections for the current quarter by the end of the day." Brian's voice echoed firmly through the meeting room as his directors listened in silence, scribbling hurried notes. Natasha, in the background, pushed the cleaning cart through the side hallway, barely catching the exact content of the conversation, but picking up perfectly on the impatient tone he used when addressing the team. Unlike the serene weekend lunch, the house had now returned to its strict work routine. It was a typical Monday at the Lancaster estate. That morning, Brian had woken earlier than usual. He'd slept poorly, restless, obsessing over small details from the previous day that wouldn't leave his mind. Natasha's voice, her discreet smile, the ease with which his parents had taken to her. It all stirred a strange discomfort, like something beyond his control was quietly infiltrating his routine. Sitting in front of 3 monitors in his office, he scanned through reports with focused eyes, but his mind was elsewhere. With each turned page, flashes of her face invaded his thoughts, and each time it happened, he got irritated with himself. "Focus, Brian, focus," he muttered, pressing the button to call up the next file. Meanwhile, downstairs, Natasha was shelving books in the library. She arranged the titles in alphabetical order, cleaned the shelves, and realigned a few paintings. She did everything with a near-ceremonial care, her movements steady, silent. But even in that carefully orchestrated space, Brian's uneasy glances had become frequent enough that she noticed. At lunchtime, She was heading up the stairs with a cloth and a bucket of warm water to clean the corridors when the phone of one of Brian's assistants buzzed loudly near the office door. The young man, reacting on instinct, answered it. "Yeah, I'm inside the house. I'll find out. She's here, I just saw her walk by. I'll call you in 5. Natasha paused for a second, eyes narrowing. It wasn't her business, of course, but the feeling that someone was watching her more than they should sent a chill down her spine. That same afternoon, after finishing the windows on the east terrace, Denise approached with a tablet in hand and a look that was part concern, part curiosity. "Natasha, is everything okay with you?" "Yes. Why?" "I got a message from the agency office. A man called asking for information about you, said he was a former colleague, polite but persistent, left a name, Gregory Wyatt. Do you know him?" The name hit her like a punch to the stomach. "I do, but he's someone I'd rather not see again." "Do you want me to block all contact? I can mark your profile as confidential in the estate system. That would prevent visits and curious calls. Please, if you can do that, I'd appreciate it." "Of course. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Natasha nodded, but her expression had already hardened. The piece she'd worked so hard to find with this job was beginning to unravel. There's no way they found me even here, she thought. She hadn't done all this just for the past to come haunting her again. That evening, while she was organizing cleaning cloths in the laundry room, Brian came downstairs silently. When he passed the doorway, he stopped at the sight of her kneeling, arranging the supply drawer. "Still working?" She stood up calmly. "Just finishing up the organization here." "I see." He hesitated. "The housekeeper mentioned someone from your past called, from your old job." "Yes," she said, not breaking eye contact, "but I've asked to block any contact. I don't want to be disturbed." Brian nodded seriously. He stood there a few seconds longer, just watching her, saying nothing. "Is something wrong, Mr. Lancaster?" "No, it just seems strange. You don't say much, but there's a lot behind that silence, isn't there?" She gave a faint smile, but said nothing. The next morning, the tension between them was palpable. Brian walked into the kitchen to get his coffee personally, something he almost never did, and ran into Natasha arranging the cups on the shelf. He stopped mid-step, hesitated, and tried to appear indifferent. "Everything okay with the coffee?" "Yes, it's in the thermos as always." He grabbed a cup, but as he poured, he spilled some on the counter. Natasha immediately stepped forward, wiping it up with a damp cloth. Their fingers nearly touched. "Sorry," he said. She simply shook her head. "Nothing to be sorry for." When he left the kitchen, he carried the half-filled cup back to his office. Along the way, he paused in the hallway and glanced back at the empty kitchen. His chest felt tight. He was being overtaken by something new. Incomprehensible, and it made him furious. At the company, that day would feel longer than most. Hours later, while leading a virtual meeting with shareholders, Brian had already lost his train of thought 3 times. At the end of the call, he stood from his chair, walked to the bookshelf, and stared out at the city through the office's panoramic window. He had everything: wealth, prestige, respect. But the simple presence of one soft-spoken woman, with mysterious eyes and hands always in motion, had shaken his balance. "She's just a cleaning lady," he kept repeating to himself, trying to be convinced. But his body wasn't agreeing. His reactions were out of his control. And then he made a decision. He called Denise over the intercom. "Run a full background check on Natasha Ivanova. Everything you can find. Education, work history, past affiliations. I need to know who I'm dealing with." Denise, though surprised, didn't ask questions. The following night, Brian was still awake. The information was all on his screen. Natasha Ivanova, 32 years old, degree in economics from St. Petersburg State University, fluent in 5 languages, former senior analyst at one of Eastern Europe's largest banks, featured in a local financial magazine at age 28, and then vanished from the radar. No records for nearly 2 years, no active accounts. Until she appeared in California, under a clean name with solid references and a modest resume for a housekeeping position. "Why did you take this job?" Brian murmured to himself, reading the data again. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was fascination. Natasha wasn't who she claimed to be, and that made him more drawn to her than he should have been. The next morning, he found her watering the indoor plants in the winter garden. She wore a light blue cotton dress and white gloves. "Good morning," he said, almost on impulse. She turned, surprised. "Good morning, Mr. Lancaster. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why would an honors graduate in economics work as a cleaning lady?" She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "Because being invisible is sometimes the only way to stay alive." Brian fell silent. The air between them grew heavier for a moment. He wanted to say something, ask more, know everything. But he didn't. He simply nodded and walked away. And as he did, something inside him began to yield. It was no longer just curiosity, it was admiration. And maybe, though he wouldn't admit it, it was the beginning of something more. "Natasha, can you grab the sun hat for your Eleanor?" Richard's voice cut through the light chatter in the garden as everyone settled into the chairs around the long wooden table. Natasha, who had just placed the last glasses of white wine on the table, turned with a gentle smile and walked over to the coat rack on the veranda. Sunday was hotter than usual in Napa Valley. A late morning breeze blew gently through the vineyards, and Brian's parents had decided that an outdoor lunch would be the perfect way to enjoy the lush scenery of the estate. Eleanor wore a wide-brimmed hat and dark sunglasses, but even so, with the sun directly overhead, she still needed a bit more shade. "Here you go, Mrs. Eleanor," said Natasha, handing her the hat with elegance. "I can set up a sun umbrella if you'd prefer." "Oh, darling, you read my mind," Eleanor replied, lightly touching Natasha's forearm. "This crazy California heat is getting worse every year." Natasha nodded and, with swift movements, pulled one of the portable umbrellas from the corner of the deck. In just a few minutes, she had adjusted its height and angle with surgical precision. Eleanor sighed in relief and shot an approving glance at her son, who sat 2 seats away, seemingly distracted by his phone. "Brian, your Natasha is a rare gem," his mother remarked with a wink. Brian slowly looked up and stared at Natasha for a brief second. Then he quickly looked away, pretending to take sudden interest in the sparkling water in front of him. "She's efficient," he muttered flatly. "And also very polite, discreet, and kind," Richard added, as he helped himself to a generous slice of roast beef. "Those qualities are hard to come by these days." "The trick is not wanting to be seen," Natasha commented, offering a modest smile. "Oh, but you stand out without even trying, dear." "And in the best way," Eleanor joked, drawing laughs from the guests seated further down the table. Lunch flowed easily, full of light conversation and laughter. About a dozen people were gathered around the table, including close friends of the Lancasters, a neighboring couple, and 2 of Brian's uncles visiting from Seattle. Natasha moved quietly among them, refilling glasses, serving portions, and clearing silverware when needed. Even as a silent presence, everyone noticed her, not for her simple clothing or soft accent, but for the way she moved, steady, serene, efficient, as if every step were calculated, as if the world around her remained under control, even when no one else realized it. Brian, despite his efforts to stay detached, couldn't stop watching her. Every time Natasha approached, he would sit a little straighter, adjust his cuff, or pretend to focus on his plate, but his eyes betrayed him. And each time she walked away, he followed her with his gaze, even if just for a second or two. At one point, while Eleanor chatted animatedly with the neighbor's wife, Natasha bent down beside Brian to pick up a knife that had fallen on the ground. As she rose, their faces were just inches apart. "Sorry," she said, stepping back with quiet grace. "It's fine," he replied, though his voice came out nearly choked. He grabbed his napkin, wiped his mouth with unnecessary force, and looked away. "It's hot, Mr. Lancaster. May I bring you a cold drink?" "No, thank you." She nodded and continued on her way. He stared at the glass in front of him as if it held some invisible answer. Later, after lunch, the guests began to spread out across the garden. Some strolled between the grapevines, others retreated to the shade of the veranda. Richard, excited, grabbed his fishing rod and announced, "How about some good old-fashioned fishing? Let's head to the lake. Who's with me?" Eleanor laughed heartily. "You two haven't held a rod since the 90s. Exactly why I need to prove I've still got it." Brian sighed and stood. "I'll drive you." "Natasha, Could you prep some water bottles and sunscreen, please? Of course. On the way to the lake, Richard turned to Natasha with excitement. Have you ever fished before? Yes, when I was a child. My grandfather used to take me to the river near our house. Perfect. You'll bring me luck. I always catch more when someone new's around. At the lake's edge, the men began sorting their gear. Natasha stood watching with a slight smile as Richard fumbled to remember how to set up his rod. Brian, nearby, seemed more focused on his phone than the fishing. Mr. Lancaster, Natasha called, holding up a small bottle. Sunscreen? Oh, yes, thank you. She stepped closer, handed him the bottle, and discreetly turned away to give him privacy as he applied it. But as Brian went to grab it, he let it slip. Natasha caught it mid-air and handed it back without a word. Nervous? Richard asked with a grin. It's the heat, Brian muttered, rubbing the lotion on his face in a hurry. Minutes later, they were all set up along the lake's edge. Richard wore a worn-out straw hat, Brian remained quiet, and Natasha sat on a dry log, watching the calm movement of the water. No fish at first, just the sound of rods swishing through the air and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Natasha, come give it a try, Richard said, offering her a rod. You might bring us some luck. All right, she said, standing and walking to the spot he pointed out. Brian watched from a distance, feigning disinterest. But when Natasha cast the line into the water with surprising precision, he couldn't help but comment. You've done this before. A few times, she replied, not looking at him. How about a little competition? Richard suggested. Whoever catches the most fish by the end of the afternoon wins the title of Lake Master. And what's the prize? Brian asked. A dinner cooked by the loser. Everyone laughed, even Natasha. So we're playing for real, she said, eyes locked on the line. The hours passed slowly. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky orange and gold. One by one, the fish began to bite. To everyone's surprise, Natasha caught the first, then the second and the third. This is cheating, Brian muttered with a crooked smile. Looks like you're cooking, son, Eleanor said, arriving with a basket of snacks. I can at least manage scrambled eggs. If that's all, I hope Natasha's fish are big, Richard teased. By the end of the day, the baskets were full and laughter echoed across the field. Everyone was tired, dirty, but strangely happy. While they packed up the gear, Brian approached Natasha. Thanks for today. She looked at him, surprised. I just joined the fun. And you did more for all of us than you realize. She smiled, softly, and he looked away. On the ride back, inside the jeep, taking them from the lake to the mansion, Brian remained silent the whole time, but his leg brushed gently against Natasha's in the back seat. Neither of them moved, and that, in that moment, was more intimate than any words. Did you see that? Whispered Martin, one of Brian's assistants, leaning closer to his co-worker in the break room. The new cleaning lady, Natasha. She used to be a financial analyst in Russia. Oh, come on, the woman replied, frowning. And where'd you read that? The Gossipedia. I'm serious. Someone ran her name through the verification system. She has an honors degree in economics, worked at one of the biggest banks in Moscow, even won an award in 2016 for excellence in risk analysis. And now she scrubs floors? Exactly. The conversation was cut short when the break room door opened. Natasha walked in, calm as always, a folded microfiber cloth under her arm and a bottle of disinfectant in her hand. The two assistants fell silent, pretending to search for something in the fridge. Excuse me, she said without looking up, heading straight to the cabinet to grab a new bottle of alcohol. As soon as she left, Martin leaned in again, now with an air of self-importance. I told you, anyone who carries themselves like that is definitely hiding something. The rumor didn't take long to reach higher ears. In less than 2 days, Brian received an anonymous email with the subject line, "Do you really know who works in your house?" He didn't respond right away, but something about the tone of the message left a lingering discomfort. It was as if his own pride demanded to know more, and he couldn't stand the idea of being unaware of something happening so close to him. That night, after all the staff had put away their tools and the mansion had sunk into its usual silence, Brian typed her full name into his laptop, Natasha Vladimirovna Ivanova. The results appeared quickly. Articles in Russian newspapers, an interview at an international conference on emerging markets, an award listing in St. Petersburg, a report from a brokerage firm about a project she led in 2017. And then suddenly, silence. Brian read it all. With each paragraph, his surprise grew, not disappointment as he might have expected, but admiration. Natasha was, or had been, brilliant, not just for her academic achievements, but for her clarity in speeches, her ability to present complex ideas simply, the command she showed in archived meeting videos, and then a complete disappearance for nearly 2 years. No scandals, no public incidents, no explanation. As if she had made a cold, deliberate decision to erase herself from that world. He closed the laptop slowly. The glow of the screen revealed more than he wanted to admit. He was fascinated and ashamed for underestimating her, for assuming she was just a cleaning lady with skilled hands, for failing to see even after so many signs that there was much more to her than met the eye. The next morning, Natasha was organizing supplies in the laundry room when she heard steady footsteps approaching. She turned just as Brian walked in. "We need to talk," he said, more firmly than usual. "Of course, Mr. Lancaster. Please, come with me to the office." She hesitated for a second, but nodded. She followed him through the quiet hallways until they reached the room she knew well, though she rarely entered it. Brian closed the door behind them. He sat in the armchair but didn't offer her a seat. Natasha remained standing, hands folded in front of her, in a neutral posture. "I've learned a few things about you," he began. She stayed silent. "I know you worked in finance, that you were awarded, that you were considered a rising star." He studied her closely. "And that for some reason you left it all behind." She took a deep breath. "I haven't denied any of that." "Then why hide it?" "I didn't hide it. I just didn't think it was necessary to mention. You understand that this changes things. For whom?" Her directness caught him off guard. For a moment, he searched her face for some weakness, some crack in the armor, but he found only resolve. "I don't want this to cause problems in the house," he said more calmly. "The other staff are speculating, I know, but I didn't come here to impress anyone. I came to work, and I'm doing my job." Brian lowered his gaze for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more restrained. "You're brilliant, Natasha. Why this?" She hesitated, then answered plainly, "Because being brilliant cost me more than I could afford." He said nothing. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers, to understand. But at the same time, something told him that this was all she was willing to offer for now. "Thank you for your honesty." She simply nodded, turned and walked out of the office, leaving him alone with his thoughts. By the end of the day, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. The rumors had either vanished or sunk into silence, and Natasha, as usual, carried out her tasks with precision and discretion. But now everyone looked at her with a new kind of attention, no longer with condescension, no longer with suspicion, but something closer to respect or fear. That night, Brian went up to his room early. He tried to focus on reports, revisions, contracts, but everything felt trivial next to the quiet presence haunting his thoughts. Her past, though still a mystery, had become a bridge between them. They both knew what it meant to carry invisible burdens. They both understood the kind of silence that says too much, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize why this enigmatic woman made him so nervous. It wasn't just her beauty. It was her strength, a quiet, contained strength, like a dormant volcano. He closed the laptop, lay on his side, and for the first time in weeks fell asleep with the strange feeling that he had met someone, capable of challenging him without saying a single word. "Natasha, do you have your coat? It's going to get quite cold later." Eleanor's voice rang out as the van approached the Lancaster family's country house in Lake Tahoe. Natasha nodded, pulling up the collar of the wool coat she'd brought from Napa Valley, and looked out the window. Outside, the sky was already overcast, and the first snowflakes were starting to fall. drifting slowly over the tree branches, blanketed in white. Brian, seated up front, didn't say a word. He was focused on his phone, replying to emails with a tense expression, but Natasha noticed the occasional glance he cast at the rearview mirror. Ever since they'd left the city, he had been avoiding her, as if the physical closeness of a forced family trip made him too uncomfortable. The Tahoe house was nothing like the modern Napa estate. It was more rustic, with dark wood furniture, a fireplace, stone walls, and large windows framing the mountain landscape. The air smelled of pine and burning wood, and the silence was deep. "Make yourselves at home," Eleanor said, spreading her arms wide as they entered. "This place is our refuge." "As long as the internet works," Brian muttered, slipping his phone into the pocket of his overcoat. Richard laughed. "It'll work, son, but I hope you at least try to relax." Natasha set her bags down near the entrance and began helping Denise organize the kitchen supplies. The van had brought not only the family, but food, drinks, extra blankets, and a portable oven that Richard insisted on bringing along to keep the tradition alive. "Looks like the weather's turning worse," the van driver warned as he came back in with the last of the luggage. "Better not try going out for the next few days. It's piling up fast on the roads." "Perfect," Eleanor clapped her hands, delighted. "A snowstorm to force us to rest. Wonderful." "As long as we have hot chocolate and blankets, I'm not complaining," said Natasha with a small smile. And indeed, the snowstorm intensified. By morning, the world outside was completely white. No sign of the road, no sound of civilization, just the wind rushing through the trees and the crackling of logs in the lit fireplace. Richard, thrilled by the isolation, suggested board games. Eleanor brewed herbal tea and brought out old books. Brian secluded himself in the study area of the house, but it didn't take long for the internet to cut out completely. "It's a divine sign," Eleanor declared. "You'll be forced to live like a normal human being for at least a day." He scoffed, but didn't argue. That afternoon, with daylight streaming softly through the windows, Natasha made a simple stew and homemade bread, which Eleanor insisted on baking under her guidance. "I think I'm finally learning to cook thanks to you," Eleanor joked, pulling the bread out of the oven. "That means your son's about to experience something entirely new," Natasha replied, drawing a round of laughter from the matriarch. Brian walked into the kitchen at that exact moment. "What's so funny?" "Nothing," said Natasha, smiling slightly as she set the silverware on the table. "Dinner?" "It's ready." He approached the table with a cautious look, eyeing the steaming pot and the golden loaf of bread. Natasha served his plate as she did every day, but this time there was a small difference. She sat down too. "Natasha's dining with us tonight," Eleanor explained. "We're snowed in, remember? And this is a home, not a company." Brian hesitated, but didn't object. Dinner was unexpectedly light-hearted. Richard shared old stories from his youth. Eleanor asked about Natasha's childhood in Russia, and Brian, though quiet for most of it, watched her. Every word seemed to draw him in more, the way she described the freezing winters of St. Petersburg, the book she read when the electricity went out, the sourdough loaves baked by the wood-burning stove. After dessert, baked apples with cinnamon, Richard stood up and clapped his hands. "Time for a game. Natasha, have you ever played Russian card games?" "A few times, but it's been years." "Perfect, you're on my team." Brian stepped forward, still holding his teacup. "And me?" "You're with your mother, of course," Richard said, leaving no room for debate. The game began playfully, laughter, teasing, friendly competition. But as the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew more relaxed, and the glances between Natasha and Brian grew longer. He seemed to soften. He didn't smile openly, but his eyes sparkled more. The stiffness in his shoulders had vanished. "You cheated," Eleanor laughed as Natasha won the final round. "Impossible," Natasha said with a grin. "I never cheat. I analyze." "A real economist," Richard chimed in. "Well, looks like we lost," Brian said, standing up. "But I'll admit, this night was better than I expected." "That's almost a compliment," Natasha replied, raising an eyebrow. "It is a compliment," he added before walking out of the room. Hours later, with everyone asleep, Natasha came downstairs to get a glass of water. The lights were out, but the soft glow of the fireplace still lit part of the room. Brian was there, sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in his hand and his gaze lost in the fire. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, approaching quietly. "Didn't want to," he replied without looking away. "You?" "I was thirsty." Silence lingered for a few seconds. "It was a good night," he said finally. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to feel light." "Isolation has that effect." "It's not the isolation," he corrected. "It's you." Natasha paused. The words came low, firm. She looked at him, heart pounding. Brian stood slowly, walking toward her. "I can't avoid this anymore, Natasha." "Avoid what?" "Feeling what I feel when I'm near you." She didn't move. His eyes were locked on hers, and as he stepped closer, she didn't back away. The kiss happened without urgency. It was the meeting of opposite worlds, restrained and intense, soft and filled with tension. When they pulled apart, he looked confused, vulnerable. "I'm sorry, This shouldn't have happened," she said, stepping back, "but it did." "Even so, it can't happen again," he frowned. "Why not?" "Because I work for you. Because the line between our worlds isn't thin. It's solid and real. I don't care about that." "But I do," she replied, her voice steady. "I can't be just another passing distraction in your life, Brian. That's not why I'm here." And without waiting for a response, she turned and climbed the stairs, leaving him alone in the dim room with a glass of wine in hand and a heart full of conflict. "Natasha, can I speak with you for a moment?" Brian's voice interrupted the quiet of the late afternoon in the main hallway of the mansion. Natasha had just gathered the last floral arrangements from the living room, ready to take them to storage. Hearing her name, she turned slowly, surprised. "Of course." He approached with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slightly hunched, something unusual for him. He wasn't wearing a blazer, just a shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows. His expression was different, less rigid, less guarded. "Would you come with me to the veranda?" She hesitated, glancing around as if searching for an excuse. But there was no one nearby, so she nodded and followed him in silence. The late afternoon air was cool, a light breeze sweeping through the quiet gardens of Napa Valley. The last rays of sunlight reflected off the veranda windows, casting everything in gold. Brian stopped beside a chair and leaned against the railing, looking out toward the vineyards in the distance. "Since we got back from Tahoe, you've been avoiding me," he said straightforward. Natasha remained silent for a few seconds, then replied calmly, "I haven't been avoiding you. I'm just respecting the boundaries that should have been kept from the beginning." He turned to face her, his eyes holding more than just discomfort. "Was that real for you, or was it just me who felt something?" "I felt it, but that doesn't change the fact that it was a mistake." "A mistake?" "Yes. You're my employer, Brian, and I'm a staff member in this house. There's a very clear line between those two worlds, and we crossed it. So you want me to pretend nothing happened? I want you to understand that continuing this would be unfair to you, to me, to everything I've rebuilt. But this isn't some whim," he insisted, stepping closer. "This isn't fleeting. I'm not some boy enchanted by a fantasy. I feel something for you that I've never felt for anyone. This has nothing to do with power or status. It's you. It's the way you look at me, the way you speak, the silence you carry. You disarm me." Natasha lowered her gaze. His sincerity hit her like gentle, steady waves, slowly breaking down the walls she had worked so hard to build. "Brian," she said, almost pleading, "you're a man used to getting everything, but not everything can or should be pursued. I'm not trying to pursue you. I'm trying to reach you." She took a deep breath and silence settled between them. "And if there's no place for me in your life beyond a professional boundary?" he asked in a quieter tone. Natasha looked up. Her eyes were glassy but steady. "Then you'll have to accept that." Without another word, she turned and left the veranda. The sound of her footsteps fading echoed in Brian's chest, as if each step confirmed he had just lost something he didn't even know how to name. In the following days, the distance between them became unmistakable. Natasha maintained her composure, her routine, her efficiency, but something had shifted. The lightness in her gestures, the brightness in her eyes, it all seemed more restrained, almost mechanical. Brian, meanwhile, buried himself in work. He signed contracts, traveled for meetings, attended virtual conferences. But every time her name came up in a household note, or when he saw her crossing a hallway in the distance, his focus slipped through his fingers like fine sand. One night, returning from a meeting in San Francisco, he stepped out of the car exhausted, but restless. He entered the house and saw her, alone in the kitchen, slicing fruit for the next day's breakfast. She wore an apron, her hair tied back, her hands as precise as ever. He paused for a moment, then stepped through the doorway. Still working? I'm almost done. I wanted to know if we could talk. She stopped slicing, set the knife on the cutting board, and looked at him in silence. Brian, just listen. That's all I'm asking. She crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, waiting. I can't stop thinking about you, and it's not obsession, it's not desire, it's something else. I think about you in the middle of meetings, when I'm driving, when I try to fall asleep, and every time I try to convince myself I should let it go, that it's safer, that you're right. It just gets worse. Natasha closed her eyes for a second, as if gathering strength. And what do you want me to do with that? Tell me you don't feel the same, honestly, and I swear I'll never bring it up again. She looked at him for a long time. Her breathing was heavy, her face calm, but her eyes betrayed the pain. Finally, she answered in a soft voice, I feel it. I feel all of it too. But I can't. Why? Because the last time I mixed feelings with work, I lost everything. I was used, I was discarded, I was threatened. And when I tried to speak out, no one listened. That's why I left it all behind. That's why I'm here, because here I can be invisible. And being with you would make me too visible. The words fell between them like shattered glass. Brian stepped forward. He was about to reach out when her voice stopped him. No, please. He froze. I can't. If I cross that line again, I won't be able to go back. And it took me a long time to learn how to survive in silence. He nodded slowly, his face full of pain and respect. Then I accept that, and I respect it. She looked away, picked up the knife again, and returned to slicing the fruit. But her hands were trembling, and he saw it. That night, Brian went up to his room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He was facing the first situation in his life where money, influence, or power couldn't get him what he wanted. He was facing a woman who couldn't and wouldn't be bought. And that made him love her even more. Natasha, Natasha. Denise's voice echoed down the second-floor hallway, urgent and slightly trembling. There's a man at the gate. He's asking for you. Natasha turned immediately, still holding a feather duster, her entire body stiffening like she'd been struck by lightning. She was in the guest room, finishing up the tidying when she heard it. Her face turned pale. Who is it? He wouldn't say, just flashed an ID with his name, Gregory Wyatt. Said if you don't come down, he'll wait until nightfall. The duster slipped from her hand. Natasha took a second to breathe. Where's Mr. Lancaster? In a meeting in the office. He doesn't know anything yet. Don't tell him, not yet. Natasha. Please, Denise. Let me handle this first. Denise hesitated but nodded. Natasha descended the stairs in silence, her heart pounding in her ears. With each step, the pristine mansion around her felt smaller, colder. When she reached the service entrance, she took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Outside, leaning against the side gate of the estate, stood a man in a light grey suit with a lazy smile, arms crossed. Gregory. Exactly as she had feared he might one day appear. Natasha Vladimirovna, he said, spreading his arms like greeting an old friend. Or should I say, Natasha, the new American Cinderella? What do you want? Just to talk. That's all. You disappeared, ignored my messages, shut down your bank accounts, vanished from the radar. You forced me out of the shadows. You have no right to come looking for me. Oh, but I do. I have a right to some of the information you took with you. And more than that, he stepped closer, the smile fading. I know who you really are, and I know what you're hiding. Natasha didn't step back, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. If you came here to blackmail me, you're wasting your time. I already lost everything I had. There's nothing left to protect, except the peace I fought for. Peace? Working as a maid for an American billionaire? He scoffed. What a fall, Natasha. She held his gaze. This is more dignified than anything I ever did beside you. Gregory narrowed his eyes. I just want you to think carefully. There are still people in Russia who'd be very interested to know where you've ended up. People who don't forget. And if you help me, we can keep it quiet. If you threaten me, I'll go to the embassy myself. Who do you think they'll believe? A vanished ex-analyst who abandoned everything? Or a man with access to the brokerage firm's files, the ones you accidentally exposed? I'm not afraid of you anymore. He tilted his head. We'll see. Gregory turned and walked calmly back to a black car parked in the shade of the trees. Before getting in, he glanced back over his shoulder. Nice house. Must be good living in luxury again, even if you're just scrubbing the corners. The automatic gate closed behind him, leaving Natasha alone in the silent courtyard. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She brought her hands to her face and allowed herself, just for a few seconds, to tremble. But she didn't cry. When she went back inside, Denise was waiting in the hallway. Who was he really, Natasha? Someone who represents everything I left behind. But he won't stop here. Are you going to tell Mr. Lancaster? Not yet. Natasha. I said, not yet. In the days that followed, she stayed on high alert. She watched the perimeter of the estate carefully, avoided going out alone, and every time a strange car neared the gate, her body tightened in tension. But she said nothing to Brian. Until one Friday afternoon, while collecting the newspapers from the garden, she spotted an unmarked envelope mixed in with the stack. Carefully opening it, she found 2 printed photos, one of her and Brian on the veranda at the Tahoe house, speaking closely, another of him helping her with grocery bags in a parking lot months earlier. At the bottom of the envelope, a handwritten note. The media would love to meet Mr. Lancaster's new staff member. Should I share? She shut her eyes tightly. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she knocked on the door of Brian's office. He was alone, reviewing contracts with a glass of whiskey nearby. Natasha, I need to talk to you, now. He heard her tone and stood immediately. Did something happen? She entered, closed the door behind her, and tossed the envelope onto his desk. Brian looked through the contents, studying the photos and the note. His expression shifted slowly, from shock to fury. Who did this? A man from my past. Gregory Wyatt. We used to work together. He was part of the scheme I tried to expose years ago. When I realized they were going to make me the scapegoat, I ran. Cut off all contact. Changed countries, changed my name, my life. And now he wants money. He wants control. He wants to humiliate me, expose me, and he knows my connection to you gave him leverage. Brian threw the photos back on the desk. This is blackmail, and I'm not letting it slide. No, Brian, you're not getting involved. Of course I am. This is about you, and He stopped, looked at her. I can't stand by knowing someone's threatening you, and I don't want you to become a target because of me. You've made me the kind of man who cares. I can't unbecome that. She sat down, tired. For the first time, she seemed to allow herself to be vulnerable in front of him. He's going to keep pushing, Brian. He'll use everything he can, and if you get dragged into this, your name, your company, to hell with my company. It's not that simple. It is. I have lawyers, I have contacts, I have ways of dealing with parasites like him. You don't have to keep running, not here, not while I can stand in the way. She looked at him, surprised by the strength in his voice. The Brian she knew, cold, reserved, always avoiding personal entanglements, was now standing there, ready to fight for her. You have no idea how much that terrifies me. I'm scared too, but I'd rather be afraid next to you than safe without you. The silence that followed was thick, but not like the others they'd shared. This time, it held solidarity. Leave it to me, he said, steady. I'll handle it. And if he takes it too far? Then we go just as far as he does. She said nothing more, but something inside her settled. For the first time since Gregory had resurfaced, She didn't feel alone. And for someone like Natasha, that wasn't just a promise. It was a miracle. "Brian, you need to see this now." Denise's voice cut through the office like a blade. Brian looked up from his laptop, immediately alert to the alarm in her tone. She held a tablet in her hands, the screen already open to a news page. The look on her face said everything. "What is it?" She placed the device on his desk, turning it toward him. "Russian Maid in the Lancaster mansion. Who is the beautiful and mysterious Natasha Ivanova?" Shaz read the headline just below a photo of Natasha exiting a grocery store alongside Brian, shopping bags in hand, their faces far too close to be considered casual. "This is recent? Published less than 30 minutes ago. It's going viral." Brian took a deep breath, his fists slowly clenching on the wooden surface of the desk. "Who leaked this to the press?" "We don't know yet, but I've already alerted legal, and there's more." Denise scrolled down, revealing another section of the article. "They linked her image to financial scandals in Russia. They're talking about investigations, leaks, a suspicious disappearance." He jumped to his feet, shoving the chair back. "Call PR. Get her out of the house now. Take her to the emergency hotel we use. No questions, no hesitation." "I've already arranged transport. But Brian, there's a group of journalists at the gate, with cameras. They don't have authorization to enter." "They don't need it. All they need is a single shot of her on the property and the headlines will multiply." Brian didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and called private security. Within minutes, the entire house was on high alert. Curtains closed, doors locked, movement swift and precise. Upstairs, Natasha was folding sheets in the linen room when she heard the urgent knock on the door. "Natasha," Denise said, entering without waiting for permission, "you need to come with me now." "What happened?" "Your story's out. The media is outside." For a moment, Natasha didn't react. Then slowly she lifted her gaze. "I knew this would happen." "We'll protect you. Brian's handling everything." She nodded, following Denise with steady steps, though her breathing betrayed the weight in her chest. As they moved down the hallway, she caught sight of Brian speaking with two lawyers. He noticed her immediately. "Natasha, wait!" She stopped but didn't come closer. There was something in his eyes. Guilt, concern, something deeper. "I'm getting you out of here. I don't want you involved any further. This has gone far enough." "It's too late. I'm already involved. This is my responsibility too. You don't understand, Brian. This will drag you down with me, your image, your company." "To hell with my image. To hell with the company. The only thing that matters to me now is you." She blinked, her eyes brimming despite her will. "You should hate me for bringing this chaos into your life." "I hate that you think you have to sacrifice yourself to protect me." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I want you safe, but not hidden. I want to fight with you, not for you. Let me stand beside you." Before Natasha could reply, voices rose outside. A window left open by mistake, a camera shutter, someone shouting her name. "We have to go," Denise said. "Now." Brian nodded and led Natasha to the side garage where a dark-tinted car waited. They moved through empty halls, past armed security. The world around Natasha seemed to spin faster than she could control. "Don't look back," he said, opening the car door. "I'll handle the rest." She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Then she stepped inside. The car sped off down the estate's back road, while drones hovered above the vineyards, desperate to capture any glimpse. Hours later, Brian stood in the company's boardroom, surrounded by advisors, lawyers, and PR consultants. Headlines covered the main screen. "Boss and housekeeper, scandal or secret romance? Brian Lancaster and the woman with the shadowy past." "This will impact the market," one advisor said. "It's going to shake shareholder confidence," warned another. "What if it's true?" asked a third. "What if she really fled Russian justice?" Brian stood up. "If it's true, then she had a damn good reason. And if I have to choose between protecting her or pleasing you, I've already made my choice." Silence dropped over the room like a heavy curtain. That night, he went to the hotel where Natasha was being kept under protection. He entered quietly, using a private credential. When she opened the door to her room, he saw she hadn't slept in hours. She was seated on the floor, surrounded by documents, newspapers, and a half-packed suitcase. "You came to convince me to leave. I came to say that if you go, I'm going with you." She let out a tired, nervous laugh. "You'd really give all this up? For someone like me?" "For you, yes. I'm a liability, Brian. My history, my past, it could all come crashing down. And I'm a man who's lived in absolute control for far too long. Maybe what I need now is to take a risk for something real." She stepped toward him, stopping just inches from his chest. "And if this goes wrong? Then we fall together. But if it goes right, it could be the beginning of something neither of us ever imagined." She smiled, for the first time in days. "You're not the cold man I met, and you're not just a maid anymore." Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. This time, the kiss wasn't tension or impulse. It was a choice. And despite the chaos outside, inside that quiet room, they finally found each other in a place where neither truth nor fear had power anymore. Only the feeling. Only the courage. The war wasn't over. But now, they wouldn't be fighting it alone. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.